Hi guys. I was convinced as a child that Maleficent lived in the basement. And I can remember turning the light out down there and running up the stairs without looking back. It's just weird because it was my favorite Disney movie and I loved it, and yet I went through this phase where I was scared. But then I got over it. For quite a while, I was convinced that the bathtub in our house had a secret trap door, and at any given moment it would open and I would drop into a pool of sharks. I also remember my aunt had a cottage, and it was on a smallish, well, it wasn't so smallish, it was on a decent sized lake, and there were weeds all over, and they used to come up against your body when you're swimming. They used to, kind of tangle around your legs. It was just really gross, really creepy. And I remember thinking that there could be dead things in there or monsters that we didn't know about, that kind of thing. So that was another childhood thing I remember. I remember after watching Salem's Lot when I was a kid that I was afraid to look out the windows at night. I don't think I necessarily thought about vampires, but just the idea that something would be in the window looking back at me, that terrified me. I read Pet Sematary quite young, and I watched the movie also quite young, and I remember the scene where Gage slices Judd's Achilles tendon, and that caused me to worry about what could be under my bed, for one thing, and for another, I was just extra sensitive about the Achilles tendon after that, yet still fascinated. I remember for months, once I was in bed, it was time to get up, it was still dark, I would leap out of bed so that if any person was under there waiting to pull me under or cut me with a scalpel, I would jump over them and they wouldn't be able to do it because my feet would hit the floor well out of their reach. Where the Red Fern Grows. How many of you remember this? I read it over and over as a child, and it was a great book, but it was one of those things that every time I read it, it was upsetting. The dogs, the whole tragedy, just even now, I'm sure if I were to just read the end, I would lose it. If I was acting and I needed to get emotional and cry, all I would have to do is read this, read the end, I'm set. The main kid is Billy, and he has his dogs, Old Dan and Little Ann. I'm sure you remember them. There's a part where he goes out with two brothers, Rainey and Reuben, and their dog. I don't remember their dog's name, Blue or something like that. And they're going on this nighttime hunt, which I don't think they're supposed to be out at night doing this, but they go out on this hunt looking for a really old, wily raccoon. They've named him the Ghost Raccoon or something like that. So the boys don't really like each other. I think Billy is, because he's the main character, he's good and he's not a little jerk. But the other two, I think, are supposed to be kind of jerky kids. And at one point, the dogs start fighting, and I'm pretty sure it's not Old Dan and Little Ann who are at fault. And so they're in this fight to the death, and one of the boys, Reuben, the older one, he says that he's going to go break the fight up. So he takes Billy's axe and starts running toward the dogs to kill Billy's dogs. So Reuben falls. Billy runs past toward the dogs and is concerned with getting them separated, which they do, and they've almost killed Reuben and Rainey's dog. And Billy turns back from the dogfight once it's broken up and sees that Rainey is standing over Reuben, just kind of looking at him in horror. Rainey is standing over Reuben, and Billy is he says, come help me with the dogs, but Rainey is he's checked out, he's done. and he screams and runs away when Billy walks over. Looking down at Reuben, I saw what had paralyzed Rainey. When Reuben had tripped, he had fallen on the axe. As it entered his stomach, the sharp blade had sunk to the eye of the double-bitted axe. Turning my back to the horrible sight, I closed my eyes. The muscles in my stomach knotted and jerked. A nauseating sickness spread over my body. I couldn't look at him. I heard Reuben whisper. Turning around, I knelt by his side with my back to the axe. I couldn't understand what he was whispering. Kneeling down closer, I heard and understood. In a faint voice, he said, "Take it out of me." I hesitated. Again he pleaded, "Please take it out of me." Turning around, I saw his hands were curled around the protruding blade as if he himself had tried to pull it from his stomach. How I did it, I'll never know. Putting my hands over his and pressing down, I pulled the axe from the wound. The blood gushed. I felt the warm heat as it spread over my hands. Again, the sickness came over me. I stumbled to my feet and stepped back a few paces. Seeing a movement from Reuben, I thought he was going to get up. With his hands, he pushed himself halfway up. His eyes were wide open, staring straight at me. Stopping in an effort of getting up, still staring at me, his mouth opened as if to say something. Words never came. Instead, a large red bubble slowly worked its way out of his mouth and burst. He fell back to the ground. I knew he was dead. How terrifying is that to read as a child? These are kids that are probably my age, probably a little bit older actually at the point that I was reading this. And the whole concept, they're young kids out alone at night. They're not supposed to be. Didn't think anything of note would happen, but this kid tries to murder the dogs. He falls on an axe. The brother is just traumatized after that. And Billy, his axe, for one thing, is inside this guy, and he has to pull the axe out and witness this kid die in front of him. It's a lot to handle for a child, and I was disturbed for a long time. Like, I would picture this in more than any movie could have done. It was more, for me, it was always, my imagination was way worse than anything that I would see in a movie. So are there things like this from your childhood that you remember that kind of influenced your path into horror? Or can you think of silly things that your imagination convinced you were real and ended up not being real and you cannot laugh at it? I would like to know, so let me know in the comments. And if I can think of any more, nothing else is really coming to me off the top of my head, so if I can think of any more, I will make a follow-up video to this one. Have a spooky day.